It is Nick and
Neil
from Plym Physio, not the comedy duo. Right, we thought we'd put a little podcast blog together for you talking about hips. Now, before you switch off because you don't have hip pain, we're kind of using that as a bit of a framework to explain how we sort of look at problems generally from our physio perspective here at Plym Physio. So the hip on its own is actually a very stable, strong joint. Ball and socket, gravity as you stand on it kind of keeps it nicely in place. But actually hip needs to be very strong, and it also needs to be pretty mobile. So getting in and out of a bath and getting in and out of a car and climbing upstairs, you need quite a lot of movement. When it comes to walking, descending slopes, stairs and running, we get multiples of body weight going through that lower limb that needs to be supported primarily, through all those muscles, but very definitely through the hip. So if the hip isn't doing its job properly, that can kick forces, we can compensate here, there, and that can result in pain elsewhere other than the hip. So if I get kneeling, so one sort of classic thing that we might see in some of our older patients, even our runners, is this sort of collapsing hip. So I would kind of say that this hip is sort of skipping, sliding out the side door. Neil kind of talks to us about this sort of crashing hip syndrome. Now, so there you can kind of see it happening. Yes, that's a bit, we're kind of exaggerating it for video purposes. But when you get that, if I keep you around there, sorry Neil. Right, so if he sort of collapses through that hip, we may well get this drop, which will cause this sort of side bend in the trunk. So this is where you can kind of see that we get some back pain. So it may not happen obviously with something like walking, but we might definitely see that more with the runners. And again, if you're particularly weak when you do a lot of walking, or the walking is more taxing. Now the other thing that would happen if we get that collapse through the hip, if I get you to spin around Neil, is if we look further down, you're not particularly good at this, so I might get to do it on me in a sec, but we get this wobbly knee. So one of the classics is the hip gives and the knee rolls in. So you get this big torsion, this big rotational stress that could potentially trigger knee pain, but also down at the foot and the ankle as the foot rolls. We've then got an ankle that needs to roll and roll and roll, so that's a lot of forces going through it. So hip potentially is the issue because it's either not strong enough. The other issue that you can have is a lack of movement in the hip. Again, drives movement elsewhere. So let's say something like running and even walking again. If that hip can't get behind that body line, we will get a pulling up of the trunk to keep us upright so we don't fall over. And again, that's going to drive some movement into the lower back. So that's why you can potentially get some back pain, again, walking and running. So from our physio perspective, we want to maybe loosen up a stiff hip. If we think that's the driver of your pain that may be elsewhere, we may want to strengthen it up. So one quick and easy exercise is we want you to be able to single leg stand, so take your body weight without this hip sliding outside, without that sort of drop into the hips. We're going to hold it nice and level. So that might be one exercise. The second bit is we go, well, let's chuck on a bit of strengthening whilst we're there. Can you do a single leg abduction for me, Neil? So you've got to hold he's got to hold himself upright, hold that pelvis nice and horizontally level, and then that leg is just going to go in and out. So that's potentially a very easy strengthening exercise that we would expect a lot of our patients to be able to do. Our higher level patients that want to be able to run, we would make that way harder for you because you need to be dealing with 2.5, 3.5 times body weight going through that leg, okay? So there you go, there's the impact. So once we get up to hopping, a couple of times body weight, running 2.5, 3.5 times body weight. You might need to be loosening that back up, so we give you some mobility exercises. So therein, the driver of your pain may well be your hip. That's where the inefficiency lays, but because we're compensating, that's chucking forces up, down, the pain might be experienced elsewhere. So we like to help you relieve that pain initially, so sort out the painful bit, and then very much target that inefficiency. So if that sort of rings true and you sort of think, actually, I've been living with a little bit of a niggle, it's not that bad, but it definitely gets worse when I'm doing harder activities, that may well be worth looking at. So if that rings true and you want to get in touch and have us have a look at you, give us a ring 656 340 or hop on the website and you can give us a contact us and book an appointment on www.plymphysio.co.uk.